The monastery bell had just finished its evening call when I saw her kneeling in the courtyard, the woman whose prayers had once demanded my head on an executioner's block. 3 years had passed since I'd heard her voice raised in testimony against me, 3 years since those green eyes had looked upon me with such hatred that I felt my soul shrivel within my chest. Yet here she was, in this sacred place where I'd sought refuge from the world's cruelties, her auburn hair catching the last rays of autumn sunlight as she bent in prayer before the ancient stone cross. My name is Marcus Ravenwood, and I am 32 years old, though I feel as if I've lived several lifetimes in these past few years. Once, I was the Earl of Whitmore, master of vast estates that stretched across the Yorkshire countryside, trusted adviser to men of power, betrothed to the woman I loved more than life itself. Now I wear the simple brown robes of a novice monk, my hands calloused from tending gardens instead of holding reins, my heart seeking peace in prayer rather than in the embrace of the woman who destroyed my world. The mist was rising from the damp cobblestones as I stood frozen in the shadow of the Norman arches, watching Arabella Thornfield, for that was her name, though she'd once been meant to take mine. She wore a traveling dress of deep blue wool, her cloak drawn tight against the evening chill, and there was something different about her posture, something that spoke of a burden carried too long. Gone was the proud lift of her chin that I remembered, replaced by a humility that seemed to weigh down her very bones. I should have turned away. Every instinct screamed at me to retreat to my cell, to avoid the confrontation that would surely follow if she glimpsed me. But I found myself rooted to the spot, transfixed by the sight of her after all this time. She was thinner than I remembered, her face pale as if she rarely saw sunlight, and when she raised her head from her prayers, I saw tears glistening on her cheeks. Tell me in the comments, have you ever had to face someone who completely shattered your trust? The sound of footsteps on stone made her turn, and our eyes met across the courtyard. The recognition was instant and electric, like lightning splitting the evening sky. She gasped, her hand flying to her throat, and for a moment neither of us moved. The silence stretched between us, heavy with the weight of all that had been lost, all that had been destroyed by her words 3 years ago. I was the first to break that silence, though my voice came out rougher than I intended. Lady Thornfield, I did not expect to find you in this place. The formality felt strange on my tongue once. I had whispered her name like a prayer, called her my darling, my heart, my future. Now she was a stranger wearing a familiar face. She rose slowly, her movements careful as if she feared I might flee at any sudden gesture. Marcus, she said, and the sound of my name on her lips sent an unwelcome jolt through my chest. I did not know you were here. Where else would I be? The bitterness crept into my voice despite my efforts to remain composed. A man falsely accused of treason against the crown has few options remaining to him. Death or exile, and the church offered sanctuary when no one else would. Her face crumpled at my words, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. Marcus, please, I must speak with you. There are things you don't understand, things I need to explain. Explain? The word burst from me with more force than I intended, echoing off the monastery walls. What could you possibly explain that would undo what you did? You stood before the king's court and swore that you saw me meeting with French agents. You testified that I had sold English secrets for gold. Your words sent me to the scaffold, Arabella. The only reason I still draw a breath is because a loyal friend helped me escape the tower on the very night before my execution. She flinched as if I'd struck her, wrapping her arms around herself. I know, she whispered. I know what I did, and it has haunted every moment of my life since. But you must listen to me, Marcus. You must let me tell you the truth. The truth? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. I heard your truth 3 years ago. I heard it from your own lips as you condemned the man you claimed to love. The autumn wind picked up, rustling through the dying leaves of the monastery gardens and carrying with it the scent of approaching rain. Storm clouds were gathering on the horizon, dark and ominous against the fading light. How fitting, I thought, that even the weather seemed to mirror the tempest brewing between us. I was forced, she said suddenly, the words tumbling out in a desperate rush. Marcus, I was forced to testify against you. They threatened my family, threatened everything I held dear. I had no choice. I stared at her, feeling something cold settle in my stomach. Forced? By whom? She glanced around the courtyard as if fearing we might be overheard, then took a step closer to me. My brother, she whispered. Percival forced me to do it. He said if I didn't testify against you, he would see my younger sister hanged as a traitor as well. Sarah was only 16, Marcus. She knew nothing of politics or treason, but Percival had manufactured evidence against her too. He said the choice was mine, one life or two. The world seemed to tilt beneath my feet. Percival Thornfield, Arabella's older brother, a man I'd considered a friend, someone I'd trusted with my very life. That's impossible, I breathed. Percival would never. But even as I spoke the words, memories began to surface. Percival's strange interest in my estate dealings. His questions about my correspondence with allies. The way he'd always seemed to know where I was, what I was doing. How had I been so blind? He wanted your lands, Arabella continued, her voice growing stronger now that she'd begun to speak the truth. The Whitmore estates bordered ours, and he'd been trying for years to find a way to acquire them. When King George's paranoia about French spies reached its peak, Percival saw his opportunity. He fabricated evidence of your treason, forged letters in your hand, bribed witnesses to swear they'd seen you meeting with enemy agents. And you believed him capable of such things? I asked, though I could already feel the answer in the sinking of my heart. She nodded miserably. I knew Percival was ambitious, ruthless even, but I never imagined the depths of his depravity until it was too late. He presented me with a choice no sister could make: save the man I loved and watch my innocent sister die, or sacrifice you to save her. In my foolishness, I thought perhaps you might find a way to prove your innocence, that your powerful friends would protect you. I never imagined that they would abandon me so quickly. I finished for her. That wealth and titles matter more than truth or loyalty. The first drops of rain began to fall, cold against my face as I struggled to process what she told me. Could it be true? Had I spent 3 years hating the wrong person? But if so, why was she here now? Why seek me out in this remote place where I'd hoped to find peace? But I wasn't prepared for what she would tell me next, words that would shatter everything I'd believed about that terrible day and the woman standing before me in the gathering dusk. The rain began to fall harder, and I found myself gesturing toward the covered walkway that led to the monastery's herb garden. We cannot speak of such things here in the open, I said, my voice barely steady. Come. She followed me without protest, her footsteps echoing mine on the wet stones. The herb garden was sheltered by ancient walls, filled with the dying remnants of autumn flowers and the hardy plants the monks used for their healing remedies. Even in the gathering darkness, I could smell the lingering scent of rosemary and thyme, herbs that had once grown in the gardens of my lost estate. When we were safely out of the rain, I turned to face her again. The torchlight from the monastery walls flickered across her features, and I was struck by how much she had changed. The carefree young woman I'd fallen in love with was gone, replaced by someone who carried the weight of terrible secrets. Tell me everything, I demanded, though my voice was gentler now. If what you say is true, if Percival orchestrated my downfall, then I need to understand exactly how it happened. Arabella pulled her cloak tighter around her shoulders and began to speak, her words measured and careful. It started months before your arrest. Percival had been watching you, studying your habits, your correspondence, your friends. He knew you were loyal to the crown, knew you would never betray England, but he also knew that wouldn't matter if the evidence against you seemed overwhelming. I thought back to those final months of my old life, trying to remember signs I might have missed. The letters, I said suddenly. Someone had been intercepting my mail. My steward mentioned that several important letters had arrived damaged or delayed. Percival had men in the postal service, she confirmed. They would steal your letters, forge responses in your hand, create an entire false correspondence with French agents. He spent a fortune on expert forgers, men who could mimic your writing so perfectly that even you might have believed you'd written those treasonous words. The full scope of the conspiracy began to dawn on me, and with it came a rage so pure and cold that I had to grip the stone wall to steady myself. How long did you know? I asked through clenched teeth. How long before my arrest did you discover what he was planning? Her face crumpled with shame. Too late, she whispered. Far too late. Percival was careful to keep me ignorant until the very end. He told me you had been arrested for treason, showed me the forged letters, convinced me that the man I loved was a traitor to our country. It wasn't until the night before the trial that he revealed the truth that he had manufactured it all, and that my testimony was the final piece he needed to ensure your conviction. And Sarah? I asked, remembering her younger sister's sweet smile, the way she'd looked up to me as her future brother-in-law. What evidence did he claim to have against her? He said she had carried messages for you, that he had witnesses who would swear she'd met with known French sympathizers. All lies, of course, but crafted so carefully that they would have been believed. Sarah knew nothing of any of it. She was still playing with dolls and dreaming of her first season at court. But Percival made it clear that if I didn't testify against you, she would hang alongside you as a co-conspirator. I closed my eyes, trying to imagine the impossible choice she'd faced. To save me and watch her innocent sister die, or to condemn me to save Sarah's life. What would I have done in her place? Could I have sacrificed the woman I loved to save a member of my own family? So you chose, I said quietly. I chose wrong, she replied, her voice breaking. I told myself I was saving Sarah, but I was also a coward. I thought your wealth and connections would protect you, that somehow the truth would come to light and you would be exonerated. I never imagined that the king's fear of French spies had grown so great that he would order your immediate execution without allowing you time to mount a proper defense. The rain drummed against the garden walls, creating a curtain of sound that seemed to separate us from the rest of the world. I found myself studying her face in the torchlight, searching for traces of the woman I'd once known. She was still beautiful, but it was a fractured beauty, like a precious vase that had been broken and carefully mended. Why are you here, Arabella? I asked finally. Why seek me out now, after all this time? Surely you know that your testimony succeeded. I lost everything. My lands, my title, my place in society, even my name is now synonymous with treason. What more could you possibly want from me? She reached into the folds of her cloak and withdrew a small leather pouch, worn smooth by handling. Because I discovered something that changes everything, she said, extending it toward me. 2 years ago, while going through Percival's study after he'd taken ill, I found this hidden behind a loose stone in the wall. With trembling hands I took the pouch and opened it. Inside were letters, my letters, or rather, letters that appeared to be from me. But as I examined them more closely in the flickering light, I could see the subtle differences in the handwriting, the slight variations that marked them as forgeries. The originals, I breathed. These are the actual treasonous letters that were presented as evidence against me. Along with instructions to the forger, payment records, and a list of all the witnesses Percival bribed, she confirmed. Everything needed to prove your innocence and expose the conspiracy. I've carried them with me for 2 years, trying to find the courage to approach you, to beg for your forgiveness. I stared at the letters in my hands, feeling a mixture of vindication and fury. Here was the proof of my innocence, the evidence that could have saved me from exile and disgrace. But it had come too late, far too late. 2 years, I said slowly. You've had this evidence for 2 years, and you're only bringing it to me now. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. I tried to find you, she said desperately. After Percival died of the fever last winter, I hired investigators, offered rewards, searched every corner of England. But you had vanished so completely that many believed you were dead. It was only 3 weeks ago that I learned of your presence here, and I came as soon as I could. Percival was dead. The man who had orchestrated my downfall, who had forced Arabella to choose between her sister and me, who had stolen my life for his own greed, he was beyond my reach now, beyond any earthly justice I might have sought. What of Sarah? I asked. Is she well? A ghost of a smile crossed Arabella's lips. She married a country vicar last spring. A good man who loves her dearly and knows nothing of the shadow that once hung over our family. She believes you were guilty of treason. I thought it kinder to let her continue believing that than to burden her with the truth of what Percival threatened. The implications of what she was telling me began to sink in. With the evidence she carried, I could potentially reclaim my lands, restore my title, return to the world I'd lost. But what kind of world would it be? Most of my former friends had abandoned me the moment the accusations surfaced. The woman I'd loved had testified against me, even if she'd been forced to do so. And I had found a measure of peace in this simple life, a purpose I'd never known in my days of wealth and privilege. Then she spoke 3 words that shattered everything I believed I knew about that terrible day and the years that followed. I still love you. Those 3 words hit me like a physical blow, stealing the breath from my lungs and making the world spin around me. I staggered backward until my shoulders hit the cold stone wall, staring at her in disbelief. "What did you say?" I whispered, though I'd heard her perfectly clearly. "I still love you," she repeated, her voice stronger now, more certain. "I have loved you every day for the past 3 years, even as I hated myself for what I was forced to do. There hasn't been a moment when I didn't regret my choice, when I didn't wish I had found another way." I shook my head violently. "You cannot say such things. You destroyed my life, Arabella. You stood in that courtroom and condemned me with your own words." "I know," she said, taking a step closer to me. "And I would give anything to undo that moment, to find the courage I lacked then. But Marcus, you must understand I never stopped loving you. Even when I believed you were guilty, even when I thought you had betrayed our country, something deep in my heart refused to accept it. The rain continued to fall beyond our sheltered alcove, and I found myself remembering other rainy nights we'd shared before the world went mad. Evenings when we'd stood together on the terrace of my estate, planning our future, dreaming of the children we would have and the life we would build together. How can you speak of love?" I asked, my voice raw with pain. "How can you even use that word after what passed between us?" "Because love is not something that dies easily," she replied, and there was a fierce determination in her green eyes now. "Do you think I testified against you without it tearing my soul in half? Do you think I didn't weep every night for months afterward, praying that somehow you would survive, that somehow you would forgive me?" "Your prayers," I said bitterly. "Yes, I remember hearing about those." The whole of London knew that Arabella Thornfield prayed daily for the execution of the traitor Marcus Ravenwood. Her face went pale as death. "Who told you that?" It was common knowledge. The righteous lady who had exposed her traitorous betrothed, who prayed each day for justice to be swift and final. "No," she breathed, pressing her hands to her mouth. "No, Marcus, that's not what I prayed for. Never what I prayed for." Something in her tone made me straighten, made me look at her more carefully. "What do you mean?" "I prayed for your safety," she whispered. "Every morning and every evening, I knelt in the chapel of our estate and begged God to protect you, to help you escape, to keep you alive somehow. When I heard that you had vanished from the tower the night before your execution, I thanked the Almighty with tears of joy streaming down my face. The world seemed to shift beneath my feet once again. But the reports said..." "Percival spread those lies," she said urgently. "He told everyone that I was praying for your swift execution, that I was eager to see justice done. It served his purposes to paint me as the betrayed woman seeking vengeance. But Marcus, I swear to you on my immortal soul, I never once prayed for your death. Only for your life." I slumped against the wall, feeling as though every certainty I built my new life upon was crumbling around me. "I don't understand. If that's true, why didn't you try to contact me sooner? Why didn't you try to help me?" "I did try," she said desperately. "As soon as I realized you had escaped, I began searching for you. I sent trusted servants to every port, every coach house, every place I thought you might have fled. But you had covered your tracks too well. It was as if you had simply vanished from the earth." "I had to," I said quietly. There were bounty hunters, king's men, fortune seekers all looking for me. The reward for my capture was enormous. I couldn't afford to leave any trail that might be followed. I know that now, she replied. But then, all I knew was that you were gone, and I had no way to find you, no way to explain what had really happened. The silence stretched between us, filled only by the sound of rain and the distant chanting of monks at their evening prayers. I studied her face in the wavering torchlight, searching for signs of deception, but all I saw was pain that matched my own. "Show me," I said finally. "Show you what?" "The evidence. If what you're telling me is true, if Percival really orchestrated all of this, then I want to see every piece of proof you've collected." She nodded immediately and opened the leather pouch wider, spreading its contents on a wooden bench that sat beneath the garden's covered walkway. There were dozens of documents, letters, receipts, witness statements, even a detailed confession that Percival had apparently written but never intended to reveal. I picked up one of the forged letters supposedly written in my hand, comparing it to my actual handwriting on a prayer book I carried. The similarities were remarkable, but now that I knew what to look for, I could see the subtle differences. The forger had been skilled, but not perfect. "This one," I said, pointing to a particular letter. "This supposedly details a meeting I had with French agents near Dover. But I was never in Dover during that time period. I was in York, attending to estate business. I have witnesses who could verify that." "I know," she said quietly. "I found the records of your actual whereabouts in your steward's files. Percival had stolen those too, to make sure his timeline was accurate enough to be believable." I continued examining the documents, each one revealing another layer of the elaborate conspiracy that had destroyed my life. Bank records showing payments to witnesses. Correspondence with forgers. Even detailed notes about my daily habits and routines. He studied me like a specimen. I murmured, feeling sick to my stomach. "Like a butterfly pinned to a board." "For months," she confirmed. "He was obsessed with acquiring your lands, Marcus." The Whitmore estates represented not just wealth, but strategic positioning along the coast. He believed that controlling them would make him one of the most powerful men in northern England. "And did he succeed?" I asked, though I already knew the answer would hurt. Her expression grew even more pained. "The Crown seized your lands immediately after your arrest. They were auctioned to pay your supposed debts and the costs of your prosecution. Percival bought them at a fraction of their true value." I closed my eyes, remembering the rolling green fields of my childhood, the ancient oak trees that had sheltered my ancestors for generations, the tenants who had depended on my family for their livelihoods. All of it sold away like common goods at market. "What happened to the people?" I asked. "The tenants, the servants, those who worked the land?" "Many lost their positions," she admitted. "Percival brought in his own people, men who were loyal to him rather than to the land itself. He raised rents, evicted families who couldn't pay, turned productive farmland into hunting preserves for his wealthy friends." The rage that had been simmering in my chest began to boil over. Not just for what had been done to me, but for all the innocent people who had suffered because of one man's greed. "He's truly dead?" I asked. She nodded. "The fever took him last winter. He suffered greatly at the end. Perhaps that was God's justice for what he had done." I looked down at the evidence scattered before us, proof of crimes that would never be punished, justice that would never be served. "What do you want from me, Arabella? What do you expect me to do with this information?" "I want you to reclaim your life," she said fiercely. "I want you to take this evidence to the King's Court and demand vindication. I want the world to know that Marcus Ravenwood was innocent, that you were the victim of a conspiracy orchestrated by my brother." But before I could respond to her passionate plea, before I could tell her what I thought about returning to a world that had cast me out so easily, she said something that stopped me cold. "And I want you to marry me." The words hung in the air between us like smoke from an extinguished candle, impossible to take back, impossible to ignore. I stared at her as if she had sprouted wings and declared herself an angel. "Marry you?" I repeated, certain I had misheard. "Arabella, You cannot be serious. I have never been more serious about anything in my life, she replied, her chin lifting with something of her old defiance. I know how it sounds, I know how impossible it must seem after everything that has happened between us. But Marcus, I have spent 3 years thinking about this, planning for this moment. I began to pace the small space of our sheltered alcove, my mind reeling with the impossibility of what she was suggesting. You speak as though the past 3 years have been nothing more than a temporary inconvenience. As though we can simply pick up where we left off before your testimony destroyed my world. No, she said quickly. I know it's not that simple. I know I have no right to ask anything of you, let alone your hand in marriage. But Marcus, please listen to what I'm proposing. Against my better judgment, I found myself stopping my restless movement and turning to face her. Then speak. But know that whatever fantasy you've constructed in your mind, the reality is far more complicated. She took a deep breath, gathering herself as if preparing to deliver a speech she had rehearsed countless times. When Percival died, I inherited everything, not just his estates, but yours as well. The crown soldier lands to him, but upon his death with no male heir, they passed to me as his only surviving sibling. The implications of her words began to dawn on me. You own the Whitmore estates. I own everything that was once yours, she confirmed. Your family's ancestral home, the tenant farms, the coastal properties, even your father's library and your mother's rose garden. All of it came to me through Percival's twisted schemes. And you think this changes something between us? I asked, though I could feel something shifting in my chest, a dangerous flutter of hope that I tried desperately to suppress. I think it gives us a chance to make things right, she said earnestly. Marcus, I can return your lands to you. With the evidence I've gathered, we can expose Percival's conspiracy and clear your name completely. You could reclaim your title, your place in society, everything that was stolen from you. And in return, I married the woman who testified against me in court. She flinched at the harshness of my tone, but pressed on. In return, you married the woman who loves you despite everything that has happened, who has spent 3 years trying to atone for the greatest mistake of her life. I turned away from her, staring out at the rain-soaked courtyard where monks hurried between buildings with their hoods drawn up against the weather. This simple life I had built here suddenly felt fragile, threatened by the possibility of returning to a world I had learned to live without. You assume I want those things back, I said quietly. My title, my lands, my place among people who abandoned me at the first whisper of scandal. Don't you? She asked, and there was genuine confusion in her voice. I don't know, I admitted. 3 years ago, losing those things nearly killed me. But I have found something here that I never had in my old life: peace. Purpose. A sense that my actions matter for reasons beyond wealth or social standing. You could have both, she insisted. You could reclaim your heritage and use it for good. Think of what you could accomplish with your lands restored, your wealth recovered. Think of the tenants you could help, the improvements you could make. I could feel her moving closer behind me, could sense the intensity of her hope radiating like heat from a fire. And what of love? I asked without turning around. You speak of marriage as though it were a business arrangement, a convenient solution to our mutual problems. Because I'm afraid to speak of love, she whispered. Because I know I have no right to your heart anymore, no right to hope that you could feel for me even a fraction of what I feel for you. Despite everything, despite all the pain and betrayal and years of separation, something in her voice made me turn to face her again. In the flickering torchlight, she looked younger somehow, more vulnerable than the composed woman who had been laying out her careful proposals. What do you feel for me, Arabella? I asked, and my voice was gentler than it had been all evening. Tears were streaming down her face now, unchecked and unashamed. I feel like my heart was ripped from my chest 3 years ago, and I've been walking around dead ever since. I feel like every sunrise is empty because you're not there to share it with me. I feel like I would rather spend one day as your wife than a lifetime as anyone else's widow. The raw honesty of her words cut through my defenses like a blade through silk. I found myself remembering the woman I had fallen in love with, not the frightened girl who had been forced to choose between impossible options, but the passionate, fierce woman who had once promised to love me until the stars fell from the sky. "Do you think it would work?" I asked, hardly believing I was entertaining the possibility. "Do you think we could truly forgive each other for what has passed between us?" "I don't know," she admitted. "But Marcus, I know that I cannot continue living with this weight of regret and self-hatred. I know that seeing you again tonight has shown me that whatever I have felt for you has not diminished with time or distance. And I believe I have to believe that somewhere in your heart, some small part of what you once felt for me might still exist. But before I tell you what happened next, and trust me, you won't believe the truth that came to light, make sure you're subscribed because this story gets even more incredible from here." I was quiet for a long time, studying her face in the dancing shadows cast by the torchlight. She had aged in these 3 years, but there was something about her that was fundamentally unchanged: the curve of her mouth when she was trying not to cry, the way her hands fluttered when she was nervous, the particular shade of green in her eyes that had once made me write terrible poetry comparing them to spring meadows. "There is something you need to understand," I said finally. "The man you knew before, the Earl of Whitmore who lived for social gatherings and political maneuvering and the approval of other wealthy men, that man is gone. These 3 years have changed me in ways I am still discovering." "I know," she said softly. "I can see it in how you carry yourself, how you speak, even how you look at the world around you. There's a stillness in you now that wasn't there before, a kind of deep peace that I envy. Then you understand that even if I were to leave this place, even if I were to reclaim my lands and title, I could never go back to being what I was." "I wouldn't want you to," she replied immediately. "The man I fell in love with was good and kind and honorable, but he was also restless, always seeking something he couldn't name. You've found that something, haven't you? Here in this place of prayer and contemplation." I nodded slowly. "I have found God here, but more than that, I have found myself. I know now what truly matters in this world, and it has very little to do with the things I once thought were essential." "Then teach me," she said urgently. "Help me understand what you've learned. Let me walk beside you on whatever path you choose to follow." The storm outside was beginning to pass, the thunder growing more distant, and the rain gentling to a steady patter rather than a driving downpour. In the growing quiet, I could hear the night birds beginning to call from the monastery gardens, their songs a counterpoint to the soft murmur of prayers drifting from the chapel. "If I were to consider this," I said carefully, "if I were to entertain the possibility of leaving this sanctuary and returning to the world, it would not be for lands or titles or the restoration of my former position." "Then for what?" she asked, though I could see in her eyes that she already knew the answer. "It would be for love," I said simply. "Only for love." The words seemed to break something inside her, and she collapsed onto the wooden bench, sobbing as if all the grief of the past 3 years was pouring out at once. I found myself moving toward her without conscious thought, kneeling beside her and taking her hands in mine for the first time in 3 years. Her skin was cold from the evening air, but her fingers gripped mine with desperate strength. "I thought I had lost you forever," she whispered between sobs. "I thought you would hate me until the end of time." "I tried to hate you," I admitted, my thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of her hand. "For months after I arrived here, I nursed that hatred like a flame, feeding it with memories of your testimony, your apparent betrayal. But hatred is a poison that destroys the one who carries it more than its intended target." She looked up at me through her tears, and I saw hope flickering in her green eyes like dawn breaking over the horizon. "Does this mean you can forgive me?" "I think," I said carefully, "that we must both learn to forgive ourselves before we can truly forgive each other. You were forced to make an impossible choice by a man who cared nothing for the lives he destroyed. I was too proud and too trusting, too blind to see the conspiracy forming around me. We were both victims of Percival's greed and ambition." The rain had stopped completely now, and pale moonlight was beginning to filter through the clouds, casting silver shadows across the garden. In that gentle light, Arabella looked ethereal, like something from a dream I thought I would never have again. "What happens now?" she asked softly. I was quiet for a long moment, considering all that had passed between us this evening. 3 hours ago, I had been Brother Marcus, a novice monk seeking peace in prayer and simple labor. Now I was faced with the possibility of reclaiming not just my former life, but something far more precious, the woman I had never stopped loving, despite everything that had happened. "Now," I said finally, "we take this evidence to the king's court. We expose Percival's conspiracy and clear my name completely. And then we decide what kind of future we want to build together." "Together?" she breathed, as if afraid to hope. "If you truly meant what you said about marriage, then yes, together. But Arabella, you must understand that it will not be the life we planned before. I cannot go back to being the man I was, caring about nothing but social position and the accumulation of wealth. I don't want you to go back," she said fiercely. "The man kneeling beside me now, the man who has found peace and purpose in this sacred place, this is the man I want to spend my life with." I helped her to her feet, and we stood facing each other in the moonlight, two people who had been torn apart by circumstances beyond their control, now offered a second chance at happiness. "There is something else you should know," I said, my voice growing serious again. "If we do this, if we present this evidence and restore my name, there will be those who question your motives. They will say you are only seeking to absolve your own guilt, that you cannot be trusted. Let them say what they will," she replied with a flash of her old spirit. "I have lived with their whispers and judgments for 3 years. What matters is what we know to be true." I cupped her face in my hands, marveling at the softness of her skin, the way she leaned into my touch as if it were a benediction. "And what do we know to be true?" "That love can survive even the greatest betrayals," she whispered. "That forgiveness is more powerful than vengeance. That sometimes the things we think will destroy us are actually the things that make us stronger." I leaned down and kissed her then, softly at first, then with all the passion and longing that 3 years of separation had built within me. She tasted of tears and hope, of promises kept and dreams reborn. When we finally broke apart, both of us were trembling. "I have one condition," I said, resting my forehead against hers. "Anything," she replied without hesitation. "We marry here, in the monastery chapel, with Brother Augustine performing the ceremony. This place gave me sanctuary when I had nowhere else to turn. I wanted to witness the beginning of our new life together." She smiled through her tears, the first genuine smile I had seen from her all evening. I can think of nothing more perfect. And so it was that 2 weeks later, as the first snows of winter began to dust the monastery walls, Arabella Thornfield became my wife in a simple ceremony attended only by the monks who had become my brothers and a few trusted friends who had never stopped believing in my innocence. She wore a gown of cream-colored wool, simple and elegant, with a crown of winter roses that Brother Augustine had helped her weave that morning. The evidence she had brought cleared my name completely, as we had hoped. The king himself issued a formal pardon and restoration of all my lands and titles, along with a substantial compensation for the years I had spent in exile. But more importantly, the truth of Percival's conspiracy became widely known, and those who had been too quick to believe the worst of me were forced to confront their own prejudices and failures. We chose not to return to the grand estate where I had grown up, selling it instead to a family who would love it as it deserved to be loved. Instead, we bought a modest manor house in the countryside close enough to the monastery that I could continue to visit Brother Augustine and assist with his work among the poor. The rest of my restored wealth we used to help the tenant families who had suffered under Percival's harsh management, restoring their homes and livelihoods. Arabella proved to be everything I had remembered and more. The frightened girl who had been forced to choose between impossible options was gone, replaced by a woman of strength and wisdom who understood the value of forgiveness and second chances. Together, we created a life built on love and mutual respect, on shared faith and common purpose. Our first child was born in the spring, a daughter with her mother's green eyes and what Arabella claimed was my stubborn chin. We named her Hope, for she represented everything we had thought lost but found again through the grace of God and the power of love. As I write these words now, many years later, watching Arabella tend to our garden while our children play in the meadow beyond, I am struck by the mysterious ways in which our lives unfold. The courtyard of that silent monastery, where I first saw the woman who had once prayed for my execution, became the place where I learned that love truly can conquer all obstacles, even the greatest betrayals. For in the end, every heart deserves a second chance to love, and sometimes the very thing that seems to destroy us becomes the foundation upon which we build something far more beautiful than we ever dared to imagine. If this story of second chances and the triumph of love over seemingly impossible odds has touched your heart, subscribe for more tales of hope, redemption, and the incredible power of forgiveness to transform even the most broken situations into something beautiful.